I'm Jason Klom, and this is the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Jason Klom, your host. With me this week to talk comedy on vinyl, to talk his own career, to talk all kinds of things, is Neil Innes. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hello, Jason, and hello, all your listener.
You're not wrong.
No, I firmly believe there's only one person listening at a time.
They're very dedicated. They've set out a schedule so that nobody interrupts the other. I appreciate that. They're very nice people, my listeners. So I want to get started wherever you want to start, but I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, it would be weird to start here and not know, but I mean, I'll just name the things that you're probably best known for, and that would be the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, working with Monty Python, the Ruddles. There's a million other things, though, and your solo career is also wonderful, and your music and comedy is great to listen to. But I want to start wherever makes the most sense for you, but at the very least, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band was notorious for, hey, we collect a bunch of weird, obscure comedy records, and then we either cover them or get heavily influenced by them.
That's a very good in, Jason, because, I mean, the Bonzos collectively delighted in finding old wind-up gramophone records, 78s, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we only looked for the comedy ones, the most extraordinary titles, you know, because we saw them in junk shops and street markets, and the only thing you could go by is what was on the label.
Yeah.
The sillier the title, the more obvious it became. You had to part with a penny or tuppence to buy these.
Right.
But you couldn't hear them until you got home. But we found such treasures, you know, like The Stalkers Brought a Son and Daughter to Mr. and Mrs. Mickey Mouse, Hunting Tigers Out in India, I'm Going to Bring a Watermelon to My Girl Tonight, Alibaba's Camel, all the early stuff, we all found them. And if they were funny enough, not on vinyl, but on, shellac or whatever it was called.
Right.
It was just sound. And so the sillier the song, the sillier the title, we liked it and learnt it.
Right. Yeah. See, I actually have, because I've been doing a little bit of digging and some research in terms of the old stuff you could find. Did you ever stumble across anything that was comedy but not music? I can't imagine that happened.
We weren't really looking for that. But
sure.
I mean, later on, you know, I dug out, I found some treasures. There were what was it called? I had an American history of radio theme tunes.
Oh.
An album of it, and that was wonderful. And there were people like, I heard Henny Youngman.
Sure.
Sorry, it makes me laugh just thinking of it. You know, he was master of the one-liner, you know.
Yeah. Talking
about, I checked into my hotel room. The room was so small, I closed the door and the doorknob got in bed with me, you know, that kind of thing. And there was another thing, I don't know, this goes way back and I can't remember their names, but there was a couple of hillbillies and a guy that, you know, the wife was saying, "Pa, get up. Our woodshed is on fire." And he'd say, "Quiet, Ma, I'm praying for rain." You know, and it was so slow. And there was another sketch that somebody did, said, "Well, on today's program, we have the so-and-so and so-and-so, the president of the Society for Speaking Very Slowly. What made you start the Society for Speaking Very Slowly?" You know, "Well, I started," you know, and it was painful. The tension was wonderful.
Of course.
So, yeah, I'm a big fan of non-musical comedy on vinyl too.
Right. Oh man, I love it. The thing is, you're also, there are plenty of collectors now of 78s who, you know, they have these incredibly inclusive lists that have as much stuff as they've ever found. I do wonder if, when you were originally shopping for records, if there's some stuff that might have died out, because I mean, you know, you were shopping 40 years after some of this stuff was made, and now it's a full several decades later, and yeah. I do wonder if there's any stuff that you guys found that just is no longer even available.
I'm sure.
There
I'm
has to have
sure.
been.
But I mean, you see, you're not talking to an archivist. I
Right.
just, I never kept lists. We found them and we consumed them.
Yeah.
We played them at home and then said, "We listen to this." We said, "Well, yes, we've got to learn that one," and we did it. And we just once we'd learned it, we almost never played the record again because it changed by the time we'd finished mucking about with it.
Right. What?
So we weren't historians or, um, you know, curators of past art, but we consumed it because we found that being young in the 60s and looking back 40 years, most of these songs came from just after the First World War
Right.
and the Great Depression in 1928, and people were still being funny, and I think we all related to the human scale of it, a bit like Laurel and Hardy. Well, my grandchildren love Laurel and Hardy. That it goes on. It's human scale,
Yeah.
and I think that's what attracted us to this sort of stuff in the first place.
What? So when you're collecting this stuff, I mean, as a group, uh, actually, let's go back a couple years. Let's start first when you were a little kid. What kind of comedy was there in the house, if there was any, including comedy music? Was there any of this kind of stuff that you eventually sought out when you were in your
Well,
20s?
as a little kid, I mean, everyone grew up with kind of children's hour music, and there was a chap called Uncle Mac who used to play records for children, including the Teddy Bear's Picnic and things like that. But he
Uh-huh.
also played Leadbelly and Muddy Waters, and that's where Eric
Oh,
Clapton
wow.
first heard. You know, so there was a kind of a great variety of stuff being played for children.
Mm-hmm.
And as a toddler, I had memories of conducting the radio at bedtime with a little ruler,
Ha!
to not to delay being put to bed. But I've always loved music, and it's funny. I recently discovered a CD of Joseph Locke, the Irish tenor, and because I'd seen the film "Hear My Song," which was about him,
Uh-huh.
and we found this CD and ordered it, and there's a thing. It is "Hear My Song," Violetta, in my gondola, and I can still remember as a child the string arrangement. Da, 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 da. And it's funny how these things just stick.
That's amazing. I love how. So how old were you, do you think, when you were listening to that? Like very tiny, 5, 6, 7?
Three, four.
3? Oh my God. See, this is,
Yeah.
well, I mean, you say that now, I act surprised, and then I realize like my first love was when I was 3 and fell in love with Cyndi Lauper's voice, because that was one of the first voices I heard on the radio. So it's not dissimilar, although it's a little less sophisticated because you were conducting a whole orchestra. But you know, it's basically the same concept. That stuff does stick with you.
Cyndi Lauper's voice? You're talking about her singing voice, right?
Yes,
Yeah, because her speaking voice is a bit like singing in the rain.
that's so different. It's so different.
And to my eternal shame, I met the lovely lady at a Ruttles video shoot in New York, and she came up and spoke to me, and I said, "Cindy, why the funny voice?"
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah, I can make a real gaff if I have a mind to. I tell you what, she does do disdain very well. I mean, she gave me a look.
I bet. Oh, that's amazing. So the Bonzos got together in art school, correct?
Yeah, all the different art schools in London, which was kind of amazing. But we had a meeting point, which is the Royal College of Art up in Kensington. And in the canteen, as we're up to 14 or 15 of us would play this stuff with enthusiasm and not necessarily much proficiency. But we all shared the joke. We just liked this sort of this silly old stuff of these people. It's probably hard to remember, but I mean, when I was sort of a teenager, we'd grown up with parents who'd been through a world war.
Yeah.
And we felt sort of duty bound to try and cheer them up a bit. And but it was a time. It was an interesting time because after such a horrendous period, you know, everybody seemed to want to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And these songs from just after the First World War were obviously trying to do that,
Yeah.
as well. So, I mean, it was in that spirit of optimism as a young person that we giggled at the stuff from the past. No doubt young people today are giggling at the stuff from the 60s.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, there are plenty of people who are going to take what's given to them in the past and be like, okay, well, we've clearly moved beyond this. But then there are weird, for lack of a better, weird nerds born every year that like this stuff from your years previous. So do you think that's specifically what it was? I mean, because I mean, some of the stuff that you were covering was from the 20s, so well before that. So was that because, oh, this is stuff our parents listened to, maybe it was in the house, it's similar to stuff that was in the house? Because there's also plenty of people from your generation who had complete and utter disdain for wartime stuff, for austerity, who really 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 wanted to crap on it, understandably, I think.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, well, my mother, for example, wore a headscarf because the Queen did.
Really?
I mean, they really needed, they'd been, they didn't have any counselling for what they went through.
Sure.
Um, and so, yeah, there was a kind of, we are the younger generation, and we want to sort of, make the world a better place kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't really know that much at 20 something or whatever. But I think your heart's in the right place. And a lot of us felt the same. And I think that's what happens. Young people tend to sort of group together, birds of a feather, and try and make the changes they want to make.
Yeah.
That's the ones who want to make changes.
Right. Right. What's so funny is I keep wanting to bring up a certain brand of, I don't even know where to go with this, but except to say that I'm not even sure how to bring this up because it's not that obscure. It's quite right in front of you. But in the late 60s and the early 70s, there did seem to be this interesting sudden callback to, it was weird. It was kind of a reflection of sometimes Victorian stuff, but definitely the 20s. So bringing back jazz, bringing back deco art, sort of, kind of the style even of Yellow Submarine, and then the cover of, which we will get to, the cover of the art for the Winchester Cathedral album. Things like that. There's a weird, there's probably a term for it. I don't know enough about art history to know what this weird retro period of the 60s was. But
Well, yeah, people kind of realized that nostalgia was not what it used to be. You know,
Mhm.
now that you got to remember that the shops were full of old Victorian stuff and military uniforms and things like that.
Mhm.
We were surrounded by the detritus of strife and various things, and it was fun to sort of dress up in this stuff and go to parties and things. I remember once the Bonzos played at the Savile Theatre with Cream, and I bought, because we had Carnaby Street in London,
Mhm.
and I pair of flared trousers that were made out of floral material that you
Uh-huh.
normally cover armchairs with, and I bought a red military tunic, and for the sake of one joke, I wore the tunic and the flower power trousers, and I said, "What do you think of the outfit? I call it War and Peace." You know, so it wasn't any reverence or something. It
Right.
was, we were hell bent on having a good time,
Yeah.
and you know, and trying to lighten the thing and sort of see, well, what is the world and where are we going with it? Yeah, and we had lots of criticism. We haven't got time to go into all the sort of absurdities of prolonging the Vietnam War and things like that. But demonstrations to get it were very, very active, and everything, even in London.
Mhm. So
So it's a hard one to get your head round, to sort of talk in simple terms to people that didn't go through it in a way.
for sure.
But it was obvious at the time that all this stuff was around, and it was bound to filter into popular music as well.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Winchester Cathedral was a kind of 20s kind of retro thing without being authentic,
Right.
but it had that kind of whiff, if you like, of nostalgia.
Mhm. Well, that's one of those things I think I grew up loving and then sort of slowly. Again, it's very weird to be at that point when I was listening to it. It was retro to listen to it, but I'm overusing that word right now. But once I realized how much of that had kind of been co-opted from the Bonzos, from yourself, I was like, oh boy, I'm not sure how much I like this anymore because I don't know, were you the first group pulling this together? That kind of a
No,
style of music? No.
no, not at all. They're very popular. In fact, they were number one in the charts when I was sort of just about to leave school. There's a band called the Temperance Seven,
Okay.
and they had a hit with a thing called Pasadena, and it was played beautifully. And
Hmm.
and people, well, enough people liked it to make it number one in the days where they, sold records in volume.
Hmm.
Um, so there was that, but there was also an outfit called the Alberts, and they had a long-running theatre thing in London called An Evening of British Rubbish, and they, they just had fun. The Gray brothers, Dougie, used to play the bagpipes, wearing a kilt and full Highland stuff, and playing and marching up and down on the spot, while behind him was like an 8-foot cylinder that was slowly revolving with a painting of the Highlands.
Oh my
So
God.
so it looked as though he was walking along through the Highlands. And Bruce Lacey, who was an artist and sort of he just made stupid things. He made robots and fired himself out of a cannon. Well, he got into a cannon, an awful explosion, and a dummy was catapulted out. It was that kind of thing. And then we also, grew up with the Goon Show on the radio,
Sure.
which influenced everyone in Monty Python as well.
Yeah.
Uh, Stupid jokes like there'd be some sort of adventure going on, and somebody would be saying, "Oh, Lord, the sun is hot," and someone would say, "Well, don't touch it," you know, and. They've done the silly voices of Peter Sellers, going, mean, the cat wants to go out. How do you know? It's got its coat on. This is all written by the wonderful Spike Milligan.
Yeah.
Again, you can't really value or assess what drove them to do this, other than they'd been through the war.
Yeah.
Spike was shell shocked, and for the rest of his life, he was sort of almost bipolar, up and down
Hmm.
with depression. In fact, on his gravestone, I think it says, "I told you I was ill."
Oh my God. I mean, I think this is something that I don't know. The American perspective on what happened after the war is we were so obsessed with prosperity and with pretending things were okay. I mean, I think a lot of people were, but I'm trying to figure out why our comedy wasn't the same as English comedy was. And I think it's probably just you were there from the beginning of the war. You had to, and I mean, it's you were there suffering
Well,
it, and they were facing actual annihilation. And I think that must be the biggest difference.
the bombs did drop,
Yeah.
absolutely, and yeah, it's I, broadest historical strokes. I suppose you could say that Britain, um, not invented, but certainly was at the front of the Industrial Revolution.
Hmm.
Whereas in America, I think they were in the front of the consumer society,
Right.
because that's what took over. And I find it all fascinating, the whole 20th century turmoil, and where we are now is equally, disturbing.
Hmm.
But in amongst all this, people are people, and they look for comedy, and they look for um, a collective narrative. He said pompously, but you've got to share the same experience, and these when it's hard. Right? Yeah, popular music, was still like the oral tradition of songs had to rhyme, and melodies were memorable, but it had that air of people being people sitting around the campfire, maybe in a bomb shelter, but whatever, but together, and sharing an experience, and if at the risk of being pompous again, analyzing comedy, it's either funny or it isn't, and it depends on the shared experience, and that's a human thing. That's why Laurel and Hardy lost today, because we've all been there,
Right.
somewhere.
Oh God, yeah. Don't worry too much about being pretentious. That's kind of our meat and
Oh,
potatoes
it
here. That's
comes
kind of what we do.
naturally. I dropped you. Yeah.
Yeah, believe me, we talk about this stuff all the time, and I would dig deeper into, how shell shock created an entire culture, but that's not as lighthearted as we'd like to be, I guess.
No, no, but I don't think there's a certain wisdom to not analysing too much.
For sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's why I'm afraid having collected these things and enjoyed them,
hmm
I must underline that they were consumed,
hmm
and more things were looked forward. So I mean, we were consuming in the same way that I suppose Americans were consuming, but it was mostly traditional jazz played in pubs, even when I was first an art student,
Uh-huh.
and slowly, Bill Haley came out, and Chuck Berry was around, and then the Beatles happened,
Right.
and that changed everything, and it became a kind of an identifying um, social glue almost, that popular music would take on the issues of the day, and but also have fun with it. I mean, there were also appalling records in the charts as well.
Uh-huh.
Something called Grandad, with a lot of children singing. So variety being the spice of life, I think. But yeah, I was more attracted to the stuff that just made you laugh and stuff that made you think. I've always been like that, I think.
Do you let's go back to the Beatles a moment, because I mean, if just a quick, very cursory look at your discography, the Bonzos released their first album in '67, and it is very much its own thing, and it's nice that holds together, and that it is very much its own thing. It's not a very '67 thing in my head. So
No,
so the Beatles are coming along. You just acknowledged that they changed everything, which implies that it must have changed things for you. What were the Beatles to you when that happened? I'm curious, like, what that felt, because you are a contemporary of the Beatles and of Python. So I'm curious what then happens in your brain.
well, again, I'm not a fan of analyzing what happens in a
Mhm.
brain, but it's kind of the circumstances are, something not in my control, or something that I thought that, well, this would be a good idea to do this, having weighed it up and made a judgment. The Bonzos, it's, if I may, let me go back to the Winchester Cathedral thing, because
Please, yeah.
we were we were happy going out and playing in the kind of nightclubs and things like that, and the universities, our old stuff, the stuff that we found on the records. And we had silly suits, double-breasted suits, and horrible ties, two-tone shoes. And being art students, we made things. We had sort of big comic speaking balloons made out of kind of board that we'd hold up, and it would be, wow, I'm really expressing myself on it. And this was going down really well. And our trumpeter at the time, a chap called Bob Kerr. Now, Bob Kerr knew the chap who did Winchester Cathedral.
Uh-huh.
Name escapes me at the moment. But and he'd made Winchester Cathedral with a bunch of session men, and it was a runaway hit. And he
Yeah.
hadn't got a band to promote it. So he knew Bob Kerr, and he rang Bob Kerr when we were out on the road, saying, you're with this silly band. How would you like to become the new vaudeville band?
Yeah.
And Bob finished the phone call and came rushing into where we were and said, we could be the new vaudeville band. We could be on top of the pops. And the rest of us just looked at him and went, why? And so he said, well, I'm going to do it. So we said, well, off you go then. Go, never darken our towels again. And but the next thing we know is they're on television, Top of the Pops, dressed exactly as we were, with a singer in a gold lamy suit
Uh-huh.
and holding up speaking balloons. And everywhere we went, people said, "You're like that new vaudeville band."
Ugh.
And so it's a bit like P.G. Woodhouse suddenly realizing, having told a go-between on a train between New York and L.A. the plot of a film to give to Bill, what's his name, W.C. Fields,
Uh-huh.
and who'd sold it as his idea. And P.G. Woodhouse said, all of a sudden we realized we were in show business. But that was it. We felt, but I think Legs Larry Smith, the drummer, said, well, why don't we just write our own stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. And that's how Guerrilla evolved. We started writing songs, listening, having a little poke, if you like, what was going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Guerrilla came about. And the Beatles, like a good laugh.
Uh-huh.
And we, and when we knew Mike McCartney and the Scaffold, Roger McGough.
Oh, yes, sure.
Whatnot. We kept mentioning them, and it was Mike who suggested to Paul, "Why don't you put the Bonzos in Magical Mystery Tour?" And he said, "Yeah, good idea." Because I mentioned the Savile Theatre before, but in the days that the Beatles used to go out with false beards and things like that, they used to come and see us. But we never met until the Magical Mystery Tour thing. But we just clicked, when a bunch of people who have been in a van and gone out on stage. There's a camaraderie,
Mm-hmm.
And so we just sort of laughed at the same things. And George thought that one of the tracks, Death Cab for Cutie, should be a single. And I said, "Oh, come on, George, that'll never get anywhere." But we kind of we clicked anyway. And later on, Paul came along and produced Urban Spaceman for us because we had a producer who produced Gorilla, in his own way, but he had this wacky idea that nobody took more than 3 hours to make a track.
Oh, shoot.
I know, and we had all these ideas we wanted to try. So that's why one of the tracks on Gorilla, which is one of my favorites to this day, is called Jazz Delicious Hot Disgusting Cold. And it was a Dada kind of track. And we knew the 32-bar sequence, and we said B flat, and we swapped instruments. The rhythm section stayed the same, but Rodney played the trombone for the first time in his life, and Viv picked up a trumpet again for the first time in his life. It was a terrible thing because he became so attached to it. We only had 2 speeds, on and off, But that track was going to be one take, whatever. And the whole thing took 12 minutes or something like that, which gave us nearly 3 hours to sort of work on some of the other ones.
Uh-huh.
But I'm blathering on. But I mean,
No.
This is what the record company were demanding we did a single. We said, "Why should we do a single? Everyone does singles. We do what we do." And they said, "Well, we're going to." And anyway, I wrote Urban Spaceman, and I played it to Viv, and he said, "Too many verses." And I said, "Yes, you're right." So cut the verses down. It looked like it could be a single. And Viv used to hang out in a place called the Speakeasy, drinking, and he got to know Paul quite well, and John. But he was moaning about the fact that, we had to make a single. But our manager, producer, had this idea that you only took 3 hours, And that's when Paul said, "Well, I'll produce it if you like." He said, "Really?" "Yes, no problem, So we went back to management and producers saying, "Well, all right, we'll make the single, but we don't want you to produce it." And he fell right into it and said, "Oh, and who do you think you're going to get?" Pause. And said, "Well, Paul McCartney said he'll do it." So that was it. And it took 8.5 hours. I mean, I could go on about this because it was such a funny day.
God, that's
we're
fascinating.
all waiting. And Paul came in and said, hello, everybody. He was Magic Man in those days.
Uh-huh.
And the big grand piano was in the studio in the corner. He went over to it. He said, "I've just written this." And he started playing Hey Jude.
Uh-huh.
And no one had heard it. I don't know if even the Beatles had heard it. He'd probably written it the night before. But anyway, there was a grand piano. He wanted to play it again. So I was wetting myself thinking, well, this is really going to wind up, the producer, because he's playing this dirge that's going on for on and on and on, and it's just really wasting studio time. But anyway, we got on with it, and he double tracked the drums, and the track just came to life. He played ukulele on it. The producer's wife, who never came to recordings, came to this one. And she was a rather posh lady, and she went up to him he was playing Vivian Stanshaw's ukulele. He's left-handed as well. Uh-huh. And she said to him, "Oh, what have you got there? A poor man's violin?" and Paul immediately said, "No, it's a rich man's ukulele."
Oh, that's brilliant. And he goes uncredited on that, right? Or credited as someone else on
Oh, yeah, well, this is where the cruelty, extreme cruelty. We said to the manager, who's obviously thinking, well, at least we've got Paul McCartney's name on the record. And we said, we don't want his name on the record. We don't want success on someone else's coattails, thank you. And he said, what? I said, well, what do you call him then? And I think someone just piped up, Apollo C. Vermouth. And Paul said, yeah, I like that. So he's credited as Apollo C. Vermouth.
Brilliant. Oh.
Right at the end, Vivian used to have a length of garden hose and put a trumpet mouthpiece in the end of it and a kind of plastic funnel in the other. And he said, I'd rather like to play my garden hose. And Paul said, yes, all right, why not? And the engineer looked at it and said, you can't record that thing. And Paul said, yeah, you can. Just put a microphone in each corner. Because he used to whirl it around his head. So, I mean, talk about comedy on vinyl there. I mean, if you could have seen that, the Marx Brothers would have been proud of it.
I love so much. I mean, there are a million little examples in the last couple stories you told of you guys legitimately sticking to your guns, which, maybe that's the hallmark of being in your 20s and having a little bit of a success and having an idea of what you want to do. But I mean, it still takes guts.
Well, we didn't know anything else to do. We thought everyone else is doing this sort of thing. And we thought what we were doing was working with people when we went out and played live. And so why should we go the way the other groups went? They listened to this and listened to that, and they tried this and that. Fair enough, but we never wanted to do that.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Maybe we'd had several years of art school and, art speak and all this rubbish. And we thought, well, let's have a bit of fun. We thought we didn't know how long, but we were actually the highest paid band in the UK. Wow. Without having anything in the charts.
That's insane.
People just, yeah. So we were doing something right, but I mean, we never bothered, I mean, the follow-up single was I think because of Hey Jude, we did an 8-minute single as well called Mr. Apollo. But that was the Bonzos. They were unmanageable, and but we had a lot of fun. But it burnt itself out eventually after 5 years and 3 managers, all paid off. We sort of thought it was time to have a lie down.
That's understandable. I'm curious now because there are stories that are told of when you guys were in Magical Mystery Tour that maybe one of the Beatles was less than enthused because he was up his own ass. That's one of the stories.
Absolutely not true.
No? Okay.
No. I think, well, if you see John, he's looking a bit sort of bored, whatever, but he's a very good actor.
That is true. That is true.
No, but he was. That's what he was. He knew Viv very well. But I mean, when we had the Magical Mystery Party, it was kind of a fancy dress party, and Viv had turned up with a yellow plastic Mac with plastic fried eggs stuck to it, which Paul was absolutely besotted with. But John was dressed as a teddy boy with sort of leather jacket and his hair all greased back. And people were getting up and doing things. And we got up to do something. And Larry Smith used to come out and tap dance with a pair of false plastic ladies' breasts attached to him. And John sitting on the floor said, "Come on, Larry, show us your tits. We've all seen them." And then later on, George, I think, played the saxophone, and the Beach Boys were up there. We did a 40-minute version of "Oh Carol."
Oh my God. You've just brought up something that I kind of wanted to talk about next, which is, was it just in the culture to be able to do an impression of John Lennon? Because here's the thing, in the Ruddles, your version of John Lennon is to me holds up as one of the best versions of him ever. It's fantastic acting on your part, and I apologize. I'm not. I don't want to
No, no,
kiss your
no,
butt.
but I mean, I've never trained as an actor or anything like that. But I've always been good at sort of playing children's games. As a child,
Mm-hmm.
you throw, what would you do? And I don't know. I must have channeled something of it. But I mean, a lot of it was ad-libbed and things like that. So you get it if you're trying to think of what he's going to say. I mean, one of the things just popped into my head just as the camera was turned over. You're supposed to talk about the future, and I don't know. I just said, I'd like to own a squadron of tanks. That was ad-libbed. And the same with the scene in the bathroom. Eric sat there and said, "Why are you doing this?" And there's Gwen Taylor and myself, she's dressed as a Nazi, and I'm got hairy wigs and beards all over the place. I thought, "Oh, thank you, Eric. What am I going to say?" Well, we're sitting here getting wet because basically plumbing is an effective sewage system. Civilization is basically an effective sewage system, and we hope to, through the use of plumbing, to demonstrate this to the world. And I was just going at the end, and Gwen was having a real hard time not to giggle. But Eric did sort of laugh out loud, and it kind of ruined it, and I had to do it again. But there was like that. I just thought it was fun to do, and I did it from affection as well.
Sure.
Because I'm a great admirer of John, and he took a stand on things, and you could argue that some of the lie-ins and things like that, but basically he was parodying advertising campaign, and I thought it was necessary to do.
Yeah.
But he got a lot of flack for that, as we all know. He was the real thing.
It's just amazing to be able to, because the Ruddles obviously has Eric Idle's flavor of taking the piss out of everything. However, you do the weird thing is, you would think if somebody who's playing John Lennon, who some people might look as the main Beatle, whatever, however you want to look at it, but you're playing the equivalent of John Lennon. Many people might do it and not do justice to his sense of humor, but you're playing it in a way. You do a bit where he tells a joke and then goes completely straight-faced right after it, which is something you see in every old newsreel of the Beatles. With John Lennon, he'll make a joke and then he'll just stop dead.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's a little thing that not a lot of people would catch, I don't think.
No, but he was very, very quick-witted and
Yes.
and dry that way. And he could chuckle and put on a false smile and then do a deadpan. Yeah.
Do you what are your okay, so how did the Ruddles come about? And I apologize, I know this has been covered in other places, but not here. We've only talked about how much we love it, so I would actually like to go over the history of it a bit.
Well, Monty Python were playing Drury Lane, part of their tour, and Eric asked me into his dressing room one evening. He said, "How do you fancy doing some television?" And I said, the back of this is that Eric, Michael Palin, Terry Jones, and the Bonzos, and David Jason, Denise Coffey were all in this children's series called "Do Not Adjust Your Set."
Yes.
Which most people would agree was the precursor to Monty Python.
Absolutely.
So we worked together, and then said, "Do you fancy doing some television?" And I said, "I don't really like television all that much, Eric." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well," and I'm recalling the Bonzo's experience. We'd turn up, and we were working all the time, and we ad-libbed a lot, and we never did anything the same way. I said, and the cameras are always in the wrong place. I said, "I know it's our fault," or whatever. And then Eric said something which woke me up, and he said, "Well, well, you can tell the cameras which way to point. I went, really? This is intriguing, because I'd made a couple of films at art school. And so I said, well, tell me more. And he had his idea for doing Rutland weekend television. And the idea being that Rutland was the smallest county in the UK, and therefore, if it had an independent television company, it would have the smallest budgets. And it was pitched to the BBC as a reasonably good idea of explaining away cheap television.
Right.
So, and so the BBC commissioned it. And so I became part of Rutland Weekend. And Eric wrote on his own with Monty Python, but the others were all in pairs. And so he said, I'll write the skits and you come up with some musical ideas, and the brief was, well, how can you do things on the cheap, as it was done in Rutland Weekend Television? And it just popped into my head that we could do a parody of A Hard Day's Night, because it was black and white,
Sure.
cheap, four guys in tight trousers and wigs and pointy shoes running around a field, speeded up. That's really cheap. And so I had the song, and we used to meet up at Eric's house, and so what have you got? What have you got? And I said, well, how about doing that? And he said, oh, that's great, because I've written a sketch about a documentary maker who's so boring the camera runs away from him. So we put those two things together, and he linked it out of another thing of a man suffering from love, and that turned into the spoof of A Hard Day's Night, and then into the documentary maker, and then lo and behold, real events were taking place, and who was it? Sid Bernstein or something, the promoter, the first brought the Beatles to America. Mm-hmm. He wanted to get them back together again, and was offering them $20 million each and a killer whale. And Saturday Night Live were running with this joke, and they got George Harrison on, and Lorne Michaels has got a fistful of dollars, $3,000 to be precise, which is the union rate for paying 4 musicians on Saturday Night Live. And he's waggling it under George's nose, saying, all this is going to be yours, George, just get the guys back together. And George is saying, what, all of this for me? And they said, well, no, you've got to share it with the others, but maybe you don't have to tell Ringo. Jokes like this. And anyway, it led up to the fact that Lorne said, well, we're going to have Eric Idle host the show because he says he can get the Beatles back together for $300. And so, knowing that they had this clip from Rutland Weekend Television, they delivered it in such a way. Well, we're sorry to say that Eric hasn't got the Beatles together. It was a bad phone line, but he's got the Ruttles, and they showed the Ruttles, and then people just wrote in and got the joke. And people were sending in albums with Beatles crossed out and Ruttles written over it. It's amazing. Just silly, bulging mailbags. And so Lorne, it took him about 5 minutes to go downstairs and get the budget for, as the thing now, All You Need Is Cash, the story of the Prefab Four. And George was really keen on doing it because of all the Beatles. I think he wanted to put the suit in the cupboard and move on. And so did John, but so he was really instrumental in getting us all sorts of things. We've actually got, footage that was in Anthology. He got it from Apple. And,
oh my God.
And he talked Mick Jagger and Paul Simon into coming into it and lying through their teeth, So it became one of the most fun projects I've ever worked on because everybody knew what to do. And it sort of like, it came at a time, the Beatles were huge. And hearts were really broken when they broke up.
Sure.
And people thought, well, what on earth? And so it needed some humor. It needed some comedy. And so I think the Ruttles did that. But from my point of view, I was sitting there in the office in NBC. I thought, oh gosh, they got the money to make the whole story, and I'm thinking, oh my God. And that's it. Sure enough, they all suddenly looked at me. Hey Neil, do you reckon you can write 20 more Russell songs by next Thursday lunchtime? And I said, well, I'll try, and I didn't have an idea about how to go about it. But I got a following wind in that I thought, well, I must not listen to any Beatles songs. And so I didn't. But I tried to remember where I was when certain songs came out. And also because there were certain signposts, like, All You Need Is Love and the movies and,
Sure.
The Tragical History Tour and all that. So I thought, where was I? And the hardest ones to write were, in fact, the kind of early love songs things, when they're channeling little girls or whatever. So I remembered what it was like being at school with girls, because I was fortunate enough to go to a co-educational school. And the importance of things. So, like, Hold My Hand was, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to play Big Brother, but I've just seen your date outside with another, So they were quite hard to sort of get into. But the more psychedelic ones were just sort of making me giggle, just having a lot of fun with the lyrics of those. But yeah, I did it. And also the second rule was the songs had to work with just a guitar or just a piano.
Okay.
Because I knew if they worked like that and they didn't have any kind of yawny bits, we could do the production on it, and that's really where the listening to the Beatles and George Martin and the whole thing that they managed to do. And then we listened hard then, and John Halsey, who played Barry Wong, said, I can hear bongos. He said, you're right, And so it was put together with a lot of love and affection. And with musicians who knew exactly what the joke was and who did it. And Steve James, the engineer, said, let's get it as the best possible quality recording. So we recorded it on 2-inch tape at 30 inches per second.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the result we got was amazing, but we suddenly realized it's sounding too good,
right?
Because the other stuff was done on 4 tracks looped together and things like that. So we put it through a compressor, and we said that's better. Then we put that through a compressor, and that squished it up, and it sounded more like the original stuff. So we took a lot of trouble to do it, but I'm still quite proud. The music for the Russells was the only thing that came in under budget.
Really?
And it took 10 days.
Wow.
From beginning to mixing and everything.
Holy cow.
The second one took even longer, mind you.
That's an album I own that I gotta say, if I didn't have the album, I wouldn't appreciate all the work you did nearly as much, because it's meant to feel like the Beatles are playing and not necessarily be ignored. You should be paying attention to get the joke, but if you weren't paying attention, it would go by as like, oh, they're practically playing a Beatles song.
No, but that's just a lot of, quality is unnoticed in the great paintings, things like that. It's the main narrative you get. That's the same with everything, But you have to take the care. I think you just have to put the detail in there, because even if no one's going to see it, it's still there. It's subliminal,
Yeah. Ah, my goodness. And it's so funny. You talk about I have this weird interest in this one subgenre of comedy and of music, and that's fake bands. And there are a lot of fake bands who don't do what you did, which is like, I really like the movie That Thing You Do, and I actually quite like the music. It's pretty period accurate, but it all sounds too good. It's too clean, too CD friendly.
Yeah.
They just.
Yeah, I think you've got. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I was at art school, I used to paint realistically. I was not one of these kind of action painters or whatever. I could paint, figuratively,
Mm-hmm.
and and that requires a kind of anorak brain. As well, no, that could be better. Wipe it off. Do it again. You know. So I'm a little bit of a perfectionist in that way. Yeah.
Do you? I'm so. Was there any question about you being the John character? Was that always going to happen?
I didn't think of being any of them. I obviously wasn't going to be the drummer.
Uh huh.
Uh, um, but no, Eric just said, well, Ricky can be George. John is obviously, Ringo, and you be John, and I'll be Paul.
Okay.
And I said, me, John. But I thought, oh well, let's get on with it.
Who are you as a musician today? I mean, is there still? I mean, it feels like satire's in your blood, but I don't want to assume that because I'm not you.
Well, I think we touched on it earlier. I enjoy a good laugh, and but I also think about things. I mean, comedy is a serious business,
Hmm.
and so I mean, I'm not in the business of manufacturing comedy for the sake of because I'm labeled a comic.
Hmm.
Why I've kept a low profile throughout my career is always deliberate. I don't have the ambition that some people in show business have to become stars or things like that. I like the toys that are show business, and so if I think of a funny song, I'll make it as funny as I can. And if I think it's a serious song, I will make sure the point gets across without, overdoing it, or if I like not to make a serious point, I'll do that. I really feel like my songs are for sitting around the campfire with other human beings, and not for any marketplace particularly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad enough people um, see what I do and get it. But I'm certainly not. I've never been in the business, to sort of sharpen my elbows and join the the mad rush for celebrity. No.
Oh, here's a good one that a friend of mine and I are very curious about. So the Rutland Weekend Television album has never been released outside of vinyl, if I'm not mistaken. Is it? What happens? How do we get that thing out somehow? Do you know?
I don't, I don't know. It was with BBC Records,
Yeah.
and I don't know how complicated all that is. And I know that Eric has since, not really. He'd rather let Rutland be bygones, because I think he's wrong because I mean yes it's patchy but it's like a lot of things from that time it's patchy
Uh-huh.
but it has moments of great brilliance and I think it would be fun to have it out and yeah but again the record was made quite quickly I mean but again it's fun it is what it is I mean they're like sketches they're not complete um, they're not intended to be, sort of Wagnerian opuses or, foot tapping, earworms. They're what they are.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if it comes out, that's fine. But I should also mention that the All You Need Is Cash album is coming out this October,
Oh, good.
re-released with all the badges and buttons and posters and
Oh,
uh, whistles and bells.
that's
So
amazing.
I'm kind of pleased about that
That's
because we did a tour in May in the UK of the Ruttles with Barry is the only survivor from it. I'm working with younger people,
hmm
but we have a great time because it's the fun of doing the songs and we had pretty much sellout audiences and I think and it's 40 years and it's so after 40 years, you finally say, well, it's not about the trousers anymore. It is about the songs.
Oh, I love that so much. Um,
Well, Barry was very, when we did the second album, Archaeology,
mhm.
he, I think he's one of the world's funniest men, because he was answering questions from reporters and whatnot. And he said, yeah, well, it's not about girls used to love us because of our trousers, but now they love us because we can do our own ironing.
Oh my god. I here's the problem. There are so many. This is actually an okay way to end it before I let you, talk about the stuff that matters so that people can actually pay you for your work, which you deserve. It's I haven't had the opportunity to interview too many people who are at the center of pop culture in this interesting way. I mean, you were involved in Python. You're the only other person to write a Python sketch on the show besides Douglas Adams, who wasn't one of the Pythons, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
So
I
I'm
wrote the I wrote the appeal on behalf of the very rich, which Graham did.
Oh, that's so good. And I mean, we didn't even go over the Holy Grail, which I feel like that as a nerd, I have not done my job if I don't ask you a little bit about Holy Grail and all the stuff you wrote for it.
Well, it's bittersweet memories of that because, um, bearing in mind, it was made very, very cheaply, even
Yes.
more cheaply than Rutland Weekend Television. And the clue is, they didn't have horses; they had people banging coconuts.
Hmm.
And so I think the music budget for the whole movie was £3,000.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I could do all the medieval stuff and make that sound authentic and stuff like that, and get some choir people in. But when it came to Arthur's theme, I wrote this, and I was so pleased with it. It needed two French horns in harmony, going bum ba bum ba 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 bum, and a big orchestra going da 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 da, all heroic stuff, you know. And and I had 12 musicians, and it sounded thin as washing up water. Yeah, and Terry was sort of almost in tears. He said, "Neil, I'm so I love all the tunes, but everything is so cheap. We have to have something that sounds big." And so they had to use library music. But
Wow.
it was not, that all that stuff is bum 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 bum. It's fine, but it's just library music.
Hmm.
But I wholeheartedly agreed with him, because you cannot, strip something right back. You have to have something there to make an impact. And so it did the job. But I was slightly heartbroken. My epic tunes didn't actually get to be fulfilled on that one. But it was a lovely project to do. It was. We were, sitting up halfway up the hill in chain mail, which wasn't chain mail at all. It was
Hmm.
strings, silver, and you got wet feet and things like that. And sheep took an instant dislike to you. They eyed you in a callous way. And we were sitting there one time, and I proposed this game of let's decline the verb to sheep worry, and Cleese won it with the future pluperfect with "I am about to have been sheep worried." So that's the level of boredom waiting for the camera to set up again.
Well, I mean, at the very least, and I have to admit, I know that people wouldn't necessarily want that to happen, but I would love to hear your score realized at some point. But the Sir Robin song on its own and your performance in that, even in just those few moments, is pretty fantastic, and it stands out.
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. I wrote another song. Well, there's two songs actually. They've turned up in. They found them in a cupboard. One was called Arthur, King Arthur, the legendary king.
Hmm.
And he didn't have this and he didn't have that, didn't have a credit card or whatever. But that was quite amusing. So that's out there in the archive somewhere. And the other one was Run Away. Run away, run away. There's no need to stay. Run away, run away. Discretion is okay. You can always borrow on the strength of tomorrow if you can't win the day. Can't win the day. Run away. Oh, that's right. It's got some appalling lyrics. When you're on the battlefield and virtue is your shield, the only thing to do is make a stand. But if certain death is near and you'd rather disappear, you can call upon your feet to lend a hand. I think terrible.
It's a delight, though. Oh my God, the idea of things that could have been. it's so funny too that you mentioned that that's library music. I think in a lot of people's brains it was like, oh yeah, that's the music that's written for the film. So he like you say, it's not wrong. That pomp is helpful, but I'd
Definitely.
still would love to hear
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah, well, so would I, but I have no idea what the manuscript is.
No. Well, I mean, with your skill, you could probably do it from memory based on how you didn't listen to the Beatles and still recreated the Beatles in this ridiculously accurate way. I still don't understand it. I never will.
Well, I did did get, some of the Python records. I did a fairy tale theme, which orchestrally and musically works really rather well. I'm rather
Hmm.
proud of that. But that's on an album somewhere. But no, I have to say I've been incredibly lucky. Working with the Bonzo Dog Band and drifting, through Do Not Adjust Your Set to being seconded with Python. And then I had my own series on BBC Two, the Guinness Book of Records,
Yes.
with the producers, Rutland Weekend Television. And in fact, he said he enjoyed putting pictures to music, and I I've always liked putting pictures to music, and we said, well, what it should be is songs and pictures about people and things, and it should be relaxing, like the old interval bit. They used to put a bit of a couple of swans or somebody throwing a pot or something that was different from somebody on with a celebrity host on high stools with 1,000 light bulbs behind them. Um, so after the lunch, I called him on my um, prototype mobile phone in those days. I said, Ian Keel, the producer. I said, Ian, I've thought of a title. And he said, oh, what? And I said, Paradise Lost. I went, oh, I see. Yes, that's rather good. And I could tell he didn't like it. But we called it Paradise Lost. And the first series, and I was dressed as, exotically on a hill somewhere, and a couple of elderly people with a fat dog came up the hill and said, what are you doing? So, we're making a program for BBC. And he said, what's it called? I said, Paradise Lost. Beg your pardon. Paradise Lost, And I thought, oh, Ian's right, it doesn't work. And I saw a can of film with the tape round it, and it said Paroids Lost. I thought, okay. But he always wanted to call it the Guinness Book of Records, so that's what it was called in the end.
Isn't it? It's one of those moments where you're clever but wrong. I think we've all had those moments, but
Yeah.
I personally
I
love
know.
it. But
But it doesn't matter, it really doesn't matter. You have to be who you are and do what you can.
that's a good lesson. That's a good lesson from a successful gentleman who has been involved in, I don't know, every major pop culture moment for a very long period of
Oh,
time.
I'm, I've rubbed shoulders with the mighty.
Well, I mean, one arguably, I would say that you are of the mighty yourself, only because if only because you've influenced me so heavily, not as a musician, but I mean, so much of what you've done, I only realized later was like, oh, this guy was there. It's one of those things which, if you're young and not looking at credits, you don't pay attention, and then years later, you're like, oh, I really should have been paying closer attention.
Yeah, no, really. I think everyone's duty is to sort of try and enjoy themselves in life, and fortunately, there's a lot of talented people out there that help us do it, and we've just got to, you know, you know, help them do it by sort of letting them know we like it or something like that. But it's great that you do things like this podcast, and it raises the awareness amongst us consumers of what it takes to actually make something that is actually meaningful in someone's life, and it can just make you smile just thinking of it. I think it's a worthwhile thing to do.
I'll take that. I'll take that. That's the best compliment I've had in a long time. Let's talk about things that are out there that people can buy, where people can find you. If I'm not mistaken, there's a campaign to fund one of the albums.
That's right. Yes, pledgemusic.com. Of course, I don't have the link to hand, but I think if you put in pledgemusic.com and then put Neil Innes after a / something will come up. But we've only just started it, and Steve James is coming from Australia. We're putting the old team back together to help me record it because I've been doing a lot of stuff, pressing the red button myself and going back over there and sort of. It's not the same. You need somebody to, so you can get in the flow of getting a performance on tape, and that's what I want to do. We're going to do the pre-production in a couple of weeks' time, and I've got about 14 new songs that arrange from the silly to the serious again. I've got a song called "Come Dancing," which is a kind of Mexican. Well, it's set in Tierra del Fuego. Way down in Tierra del Fuego, there was a tearaway called Diego, but you could tell he was a loser by the bullet holes in his shoes. So it's just a silly ballad, but it uses 3/4 and lots of little musical jokes. And another one is called "The Filthy Rich." And, it's the same old chicken, the same old egg, the bankers bank and the beggars beg. And it's along that line, So there's a mix there, but I want to give every song a chance to do what it's supposed to be doing. And then when they're all done, we'll see how it sequences and what it turns into. But it might be just an audio version of the Guinness Book of Records, a celebration of different styles of music, a celebration of humor, and a celebration of thinking about things.
Mm-hmm. This is called the new album, right? That's the one that we should be looking for?
I don't have a title for it yet. I've all sorts of silly ones, from fake nuances to a word I coined a while ago called surrealization. I quite like, but there's all these things are in the hat at the moment. I think we have to make the album, make the songs, get them in the right key, the right tempo, and take it from there.
Well, I want to make sure
the funding is to get all the wonderful people I know who want to play on the album in the same room at the same time. That takes money.
Sure.
So the music industry is over as it was. You're never going to get budgets off anybody anymore.
Right.
It's been completely gutted by Silicon Valley and bent politicians, basically. But that's the way of the world, and we're left in our little cottage industries trying to do what we can.
I will let people know that while we were talking, it is harder to find, but I did find it if you search for Pledge Music. But also, I made a link, so if you go to bit.ly/Innes new album, it'll take you right there. So that'll shorten it for people.
Jason, where would I be without people like you?
So that'll be pretty quick. And there's some amazing stuff in here. I mean, I almost couldn't hear you speaking for a moment when I saw that there were some prop things on here that just made me panic that I don't have that kind of money. Boy, oh boy.
No, and I don't really want to sell them, but if
I know
somebody's got that kind of money, I need that kind of money.
I get it. Oh my good God. Yeah, there's just there are some Python related things, and oh my goodness, a signed guitar. Come on. Not just a signed guitar. There's a lot of stuff on here.
It's the Canyons of Your Mind solo guitar.
It's beautiful too on its own. But yes, holy cow. And you're on Twitter. I don't know how often you tweet.
Yeah, I tweet. I mostly rant against Brexit because it's the most it's a parallel insanity on this side of the water, but it's something is going on, and it's rent seekers, the money makers who make money from money. They don't care about the world one bit or the people in it, and I get very hot under the collar about that, and hopefully enough people can see that it is just a scam. They want to avoid European law so they can have their own tax avoidance offshore things.
Yeah.
I mean, so Adam Smith pointed out, the more you have property in private hands that, people have to pay rent, they're not interested in making more places to rent because they just want the rents to go up.
Yep.
It's that kind of world, and it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And President Macron, I live in France now, and I really quite like him. I know he's unpopular in certain ways, but when he came out with that lovely line when he came to Washington, there is no planet B.
Right. Oh, God. It's honestly that's not the reason I follow you, but if I didn't know you, I think I would follow you for that reason alone, because you've got a lot of smart things to say. So people should follow you there, but don't expect it to be nonstop comedy, because we have learned Neil Innes is not nonstop comedy. He's a serious man as well.
Well, I think yeah. I mean, my thing is, Shakespeare wrote dramas and comedies, and because people can't be serious all the time and they can't be giggling all the time without being some sort of loony. So really, that's what I think I'm doing. I'm like Shakespeare, but with better songs.
That's perfect. Well, thank you again. Please, you're welcome back anytime. I'm no pressure, but you are absolutely welcome back anytime. Maybe to talk about one album you grew up with, or something that maybe we could pick apart. But
what we want to do, Jason? It's a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for listening, everybody who is listening.
Thank you.
One at a time.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys for listening, or you guy for listening. And as always, have a good thing. Comedy on Vinyl is a production of StolenDress Entertainment. It is produced by Mike Worden and is hosted and edited by Jason Klom. Our theme song was composed and performed by Richard Levinson. You can email us at podcast@comedyonvinyl.com. You can also send snail mail to StolenDress Entertainment, P.O. Box 805, Burbank, California, 91503. Subscribe to Comedy on Vinyl on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It helps. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Comedy on Vinyl, or find everything in one place at comedyonvinyl.com. A major portion of Comedy on Vinyl has been underwritten by Stand Up Records. Please visit standuprecords.com for all your comedy needs, and tune in to the new Stand Up Records channel available on the Roku, where you can also find select episodes of this podcast. Visit StolenDress.com to listen to our other podcasts, watch videos, and imbibe freely of our multimedia content going back 15 plus years.